under a starry sky, around the warm glow of a sacred fire, where speakers gather to share their wisdom and insights, creating a sacred space where all are welcome to warm their hands. Here are your hosts, Sarah Odinson, Snow, Cabra, and Emily Streaking Fate, discuss spirituality, mythology, animism, and culture around a virtual sacred fire. Won't you join us around Grandfather Fire? Hail Hermes, magician, alchemist, astrologer, king, prophet, sage. Hail Hermes, hail Thoth, hail Mercurius, Enoch and Idris. Hail Hermes thrice great, hail to your students. Hail to those who taught you, and hail to those that you teach. Hail to the alchemist and the astrologer, the scribe and the lecturer. Hail to those who discover and search. Hail to those who find and are found.
All right, welcome to another episode of Around Grandfather Fire. This is episode 133. You know, I never get tired of just marveling at how far along we've come and how much further we can go. I love it. We're here with my good friends and co-hosts, Snow, Cabra, and Emily Streaking Fate. How are you all doing?
I am good. I'm really excited to get into our interview with Dr. Sledge in a bit. It's really cool. I know we've all been really excited about it. Not that I want to embarrass our guest prematurely. But yeah, no, I've been good. I've been really enjoying reading a book entitled A History of Mysticism. I haven't got it on hand currently, so I can't remember the name of the author, much to my shame and embarrassment, but it's been really cool. I mean, the preface alone, I was quoting that to friends in group chats and stuff, just being like, we should staple this to people's foreheads because this is amazing. So that's where I'm at lately. How about you, Cabra?
Have you considered nailing it to the door of a church? I hear that goes over well.
They're big on pamphlets and manifestos on church doors, yeah.
Yeah. I'm good, tired. For summer solstice, I helped run one one ritual that was reclaiming style. I helped run an aspecting in the Thelemic temple, and then I passed out on St. John's Eve. I was supposed to get fern spores and a few other sacred herbs at the stroke of midnight for magical purposes. And by the time it happened, it's weird because 2 rituals isn't usually a lot, but those 2 were a lot because they were the blue god in Babylon and Babylon. It's just a really weird, very powerful experience being in her physical presence. So I'm giving myself this week to be a blob before I see what the next ritual I have to prepare for is. How are you doing, Sarenth?
I am recovering. For the listeners and folks who haven't heard yet, I got injured at work, and so I am on the mend, and we shall see how long this takes. But I am very grateful to the gods, ancestors, the Vatir, and for all the folks who have thrown energy, magic, and well wishes my way. Aside from that, I've been busy working on July's topic and prayer for Patreon folks. And I'm really excited for this one. I got the prayer done early So I've got it scheduled to post in towards the middle of the month. And I'm not sure when I'm going to post the topic, but I've got probably about halfway done. And it's just been a really productive and really good um, session while I heal. I've been really appreciating the downtime. How about you, Emily?
I am also tired, as Sarah has been healing, but we managed to put together the Pagan Pride Day ritual for Ann Arbor for September, so that's exciting to have that in the bag. And the Dvergar and the trolls have been very present and wanting to work on some things with me. So spending time with those specific spirits, as well as a couple of my gods that have been poking at me. So yeah.
Excellent. I honestly I completely blanked on the fact that we wrote that ritual at the same time that I was working on the prayer. That's I'm happy to have it done. I'm looking forward to doing it. And for those who are interested, Ann Arbor Pagan Pride Day, I believe this year is September the 15th, and it's going to be on WCC campus. So we'll be doing the main ritual for that, and I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, and before we conclude the intro and move on to introducing our guest, if I can excitedly exclaim about something else, I have also been started reading Sacred Gender by Ariana Serpentine, and that is a really interesting book I would recommend to anyone, like whether you're queer and pagan and interested in the intersection there, or just one of those applies to you to some degree. I think it's really interesting to look at, and the way that LGBTQIA plus views and topics and concepts are explored and dove into, and gender and sex in spirituality and religion and mysticism, and it's a really interesting book. So I would recommend people go investigate that.
Awesome. Does anybody else have anything they want to update people on or talk about at the moment? Okay, well, without any further ado, because I'm excited to get into this, we're going to introduce our guest tonight, Dr. Justin Sledge of Esoterica.
So, on this episode of Around Grandfather Fire, I would like to introduce Dr. Justin Sledge. Justin earned his DRS in Religious Studies at the Universiteit van Amsterdam and MA and PhD in Philosophy at the University of Memphis. He is currently a part-time professor of philosophy and religion at several institutions in the Metro Detroit area. Dr. Sledge's work engages with religious studies, specifically in the so-called Western esoteric tradition or Hermetic tradition, in religious and philosophical thought. In this line of research, he seeks to grasp the philosophical commitments which underpin the alleged workings of magic, esoteric influence, spirit possession, alchemy, etc. His work also explores the intersection between metaphysics, ethics, and radical political philosophy. His dissertation reflects this interest through a careful analysis of the meta-ethics of Karl Marx. Dr. Sledge argued that Marx's emerging materialist theory of history ultimately pins him as electing a kind of ethics of virtue, with the ethical dialectic of this epoch being solidarity reification. He's currently preparing material on the ancient Near Eastern prophetic tradition, spirit possession in the early modern Jewish world, and is slowly working through the Zohar, which he'll be doing through the rest of his life. I have taken the liberty of taking that from his website, so if he's sitting there thinking this sounds familiar, chances are he wrote it. Most of you will know Dr. Justin Sledge from the Esoterica YouTube channel, which is wonderful, and we are very happy to have you here today. So welcome, Justin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me, and looking forward to the conversation.
So I guess first off, and I'm sure you've probably been asked this on every interview you've ever done ever, but how did you come to esoteric studies? How did you get into all of that?
it's a couple, kind of two paths up that mountain. The first path was just I grew up on a lot of shows, like Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World and Unsolved Mysteries. You know, Robert Stack walking into the fog with his uh, trench coat, and Leonard Nimoy on Search Of. Like that kind of stuff is what I grew up with. I remember like trying to delay getting to school because I could watch In Search Of, and it will be about ghosts or Oak Island or the Bermuda Triangle and all that kind of stuff. And as a kid, it seemed intuitively obvious to me that the world was inherently mysterious, that we had not figured everything out. That seemed I'd never gotten the sense of sort of sort of scientific triumphalism. Everything had basically been figured out. The world still struck me as quite a mysterious place. It still does. And I think that as you get older and you sort of get a little bit more education, kind of one or two things will happen. One thing will happen is that you'll become a skeptic and you'll cease believing in all that stuff, right? You'll know more with the Loch Ness Monster and the Bermuda Triangle, or you'll go the other direction and you kind of go whole hog and it's all of the things. How often do you meet a person who's like just about Atlantis? They're not about like, 15 other things, So you typically kind of get what, you kind of go one way or the other. What happened to me is I did both. I became skeptical and I remained interested. And those began to spiral into one another. That skepticism never became, this is not worth studying. And the interest never became, I need to believe in this. It became a spiral of skepticism and interest. And then at some point in my teenage years, I discovered the Enochian material, Dr. John Dee and the Conversation with Angels. And at that time, I was teaching myself Latin, and there was something about that whole business, and maybe we could talk more about it if you're interested. But there's something about that. There was something about that whole business that struck me as so profoundly unusual that it warranted more investigation. It was just like it was like the car wreck of my imagination. I just couldn't stop looking at it, and it sat with me in a way that I was skeptical of things, that maybe I was losing my belief in metaphysical entities, like angels and stuff. But there was something so compelling about it that I couldn't put it down. And I kept picking it back up, picking it back up. And eventually I was finishing my master's degree, or rather I was finishing my undergraduate degree. And there was just it just nagged at me. And I was like, I'm going to apply to this program in Amsterdam, and I'm going to see if I can get some money, and I'm going to go to Amsterdam, and I'm gonna bury this thing. I'm gonna spend a whole year buried in these kinds of texts, and I'm gonna see where I land on all this and settle my erstwhile esoteric conscience, to crib Marx. And I did that. I went to Amsterdam, and I spent an entire year. I must have spent 8 hours a day, literally, except for like weekends, in the Rittman Library, in the archives, or in Paris or in London. And yeah, and I settled it. I felt like I settled what I needed to settle for myself. Um, and then I went on and did a degree in philosophy, and ultimately did the Esoterica uh, YouTube channel, which we can talk more about that maybe too if you want. But that's it. It was the kind of thing that I grew up with in terms of, and also watched a whole lot of horror movies growing up, which is like, the amount of evil books found in basements that turn people into deadites. I'm like, okay, I'm interested in that. That is a fun thing, and I find that exciting. Which is a fun thing now because I've hung out with Bruce Campbell a couple times, and it's sort of funny for all that to have come full circle. It's kind of weird. There's a great picture of me and Bruce and Sam Raimi looking at a copy of Agrippa's Three Books of Occult Philosophy, which is funny kind of thing for them and for me. I never imagined I'd be sitting in the Stanley Hotel, the hotel that The Shining's based on, with Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi, or Ted Raimi, looking at a copy of Agrippa's Three Books on Occult Philosophy. So that's it. That's kind of the trifecta of stuff: horror movies, mystery shows, and John Dee stuff when I was a teenager, and alchemy a little bit. I let my high school Latin teacher let me translate the Artis Artiferi as my high school Latin 2 final project. So I was really into that kind of stuff, and yeah, and eventually it's now become a career, which is a strange turn of fate, but one I'm very grateful for, very thankful for.
I think it's interesting that you were saying sort of throughout that the skepticism continued and maybe even intensified. And correct me if I'm wrong, in other interviews elsewhere, you've self-described as an atheist.
Yeah, I would say I would say atheist maybe, but I prefer I think I prefer the sense of post-theist. That is to say that my relationship with God is much more like a divorce than it is anything else. A divorce is still a kind of relationship. So I still deal with God. I still relate to God all the time. It just so happens I don't believe that there's anything there, but this entity still dwells large in my mind. But yeah, I'm a very boring, people often think I must have some kind of very exotic metaphysical outlook, but I'm a very boring Marxist. I probably have the politics of like your 85-year-old Russian grandfather. That's basically my metaphysical worldview. So it's a very boring metaphysics in some ways. But but yeah, it's never been the case that my materialism, whatever that means, or my post-theism has never gotten into the way, I think, of me taking this material very seriously. Because at the end of the day, one of the important lessons that I've learned in my life, and I'm still learning it, is I'm not the main character. And insofar as I'm not the main character, showcasing what I believe and my metaphysical commitments or lack thereof is not the most important thing. But the most important thing is providing education, and I can only provide really good education if I present the material that I have expertise in the most sympathetic light possible. That's what matters. Not, you know, let me get on my high horse and tell you about John D. That's for amateurs. Um, Professionals, our job is to be sympathetic and to present the material as strongly and as convincingly as possible. So much so that I hope, insofar as people can't even tell what I believe from watching an esoteric episode, if that's true, that I'm actually doing my job. And when my biases come through, which I have my biases, everyone has their biases, but when my biases come through to that degree, then I've failed. So that's kind of the thing there.
I mean, I would say that you're definitely succeeding there. I mean, originally when we were sort of writing notes for this episode, we got a few times, to basically sort of ask you your beliefs and such, because between us, we probably watched every video you've put out, and we couldn't figure it out. But then we kind of did research, heard you do interviews elsewhere, and was kind of like, oh, okay, this has sort of been gone into. So I would say on that front, if you're concerned, I'd say you're definitely succeeding there.
Yeah, honestly, if we hadn't found that through one of your interviews, I think with Glitch Bottle, where it came up, um, I wouldn't have known, because the impression I got from your recent video on the bowls to prevent evil spirits from entering homes and people, I didn't think I'd be watching a discussion about anti-demon bowls with that much attention, but I really appreciate the depth and breadth that you dig into things with, and the citing of the sources and the willingness to put up your own artifact for study is a hell of a thing.
Yeah, I think that again, we all have our biases, and I don't deny having my own biases. The thing about them is that I be aware of them, be honest about them,
Right.
and do the best you can to check them. And when I write a script, trust me, I write a script, I look at it over a couple times, and but I say that, but also I have certain biases that I'm perfectly willing to let be clear. I don't, I'm not gonna equivocate on things like conspiracy theories. I'm not gonna equivocate on things like racism or bigotry, homophobia, transphobia. I'm not gonna equivocate on what I know is objectively harmful in the world to people that I care about. Like what I believe, I don't really, no one should give a damn what I believe. But what I'm
Right.
not gonna equivocate on is forces out in the world which are literally killing people. I think that's a place where being neutral is complicitness, and I don't equivocate on that kind of thing. So yeah, when people want to bring it with all the white people came from Atlantis and they're the real blah blah, I'm like, no, don't like miss me with that, and like don't come around me with that, and I'm not going to tolerate it for a second, because the toleration of intolerance is just a ticking time bomb. So I don't. So I take things that I know harm people very seriously. I don't take myself terribly seriously.
Um,
Myself and my beliefs or whatever.
And one thing that reminds me of sort of a point that you kind of raised a few times there was something I really appreciated in the lecture that Dr. Dana Trell and yourself did on perennialism and critiquing perennialism and talking about how an issue with that is you're removing things from their own contexts and trying to sort of force through lines and kind of force a universality to things. And so from what I'm understanding of what you're saying here is your intention with esoterica is to kind of view things in their own context and kind of present things as offer things as presenting their own cases.
That's right.
Yeah.
To showcase things, showcase ideas as being very reasonable given that time period, and you know, people generally speaking just aren't crazy. Like even someone who thinks that angels are talking to them and telling them to sleep with their scryer's wife, that seems really weird to us. But that's only because they've been talking to angels for 7 years. And you know, it's like we have to take seriously that the alchemists and the necromancers and the astrologers and these other people were totally reasonable. I begin with the assumption that these people are reasonable, that what they're doing is reasonable, and then I go from there. I don't start from the assumption, oh, this is ridiculous, and let me debunk this. I don't have any interest in doing that. I swore to myself at the very beginning of the channel I would never do debunking videos. I never have. I won't. I don't think they're inherently bad, but I think there are problems with them. I'm not going to do them because my job, you know, I'll give an example. I find certain forms of Gnostic dualism, Sethian Gnosticism, to be, I think, a very toxic philosophy, frankly. I find it to be extremely anti-body, anti-world. I feel like people adopt those kind of philosophies now. We have a severe ecological problem, and having an extractive view of the world where the body is bad, that only serves to mostly hurt the planet we live in, the animals and other life that we are living with, and women particularly who have been historically associated with the body. And I don't find that belief system to be at all anything other than super toxic. But was it reasonable in that time period? It was. It had a certain reasonability to it. And my job is to present it as reasonable. I find it to be a super toxic belief system. I'm frightened that anyone would adopt it now. But again, my job is not to diagnose and evaluate the merits of a belief system. It's to present it as reasonable given its historical, religious, philosophical context. But yeah, someone comes and asks me, what do you think of Sethian Gnosticism? I was like, I hope no one believes that stuff. It seems awful. But if I were living in, you know, 3rd century Alexandria, would that be an attractive worldview? Perhaps. So yeah, it's not my job to pathologize and diagnose. It's not my job.
So I'm sort of curious then, in sort of your life generally and in how you write and produce esoterica, are you more accustomed to interacting with and writing for academics, or are you starting to become more accustomed with interacting with and writing for people who maybe are involved with occultism or paganism or polytheism in the modern day and stuff? And are you sort of considering maybe that balance when you're writing esoterica?
Yeah, I try to write every script to be as rigorous as it would need to be for me to deliver it in a classroom in an advanced undergraduate or graduate, lower level graduate class, and they would pass muster. So I write it with that rigor in mind. It needs to be as rigorous as an undergraduate class would be, or upper level undergraduate class, lower level graduate student class. But I write them with a mind toward accessibility because that's my number one driving concern. Second to scholarly rigor is accessibility. And accessibility comes at, I need to be able to describe these things with enough intellectual rigor that um, I don't abandon that rigor. I don't want to use the term dumb it down because I think there's a real ableism in that kind of that way of talking, and that's not the way I want to go with it. But also at the same time, I want this to be accessible to anyone who's willing to do some work of listening carefully, maybe doing some remedial reading, maybe looking some words up, you know. And I want it to be accessible to everybody from just a hard-bitten, cynical atheist who's just interested in history, the sideshow of history from their opinion, all the way to people doing Dungeons and Dragons and world building and like making video games, or novelists, people working on stuff, all the way to practitioners um, uh, who would utilize what they're learning to deepen their spiritual practice. And it does matter to me a lot, even as a person who is not or who's not spiritual. I'm a very religious person, and I understand as a religious person, it matters to me that I treat this material with the respect that it deserves, because this is often representative of people's spiritual paths. So again, that means I can treat the content with some levity. And I've reached out to occult practitioners and said, look, man, if I ever cross the line where I'm disrespectful, just like let me know. Shoot me an email and say, hey, the joke was kind of off color, like maybe disrespectful. I will, one, I will apologize, and two, I'll do better. But what I found is that most occult practitioners also don't want to watch a real dry, boring video about Enochian. They also want to they also look at this angelic stuff and go like, this is crazy. It just so happens that my spirituality is kind of nutty, but I got news for everybody. Spirituality is just kind of crazy. It doesn't matter what it is. Like whether it's, whether it's Odin hanging himself on a tree, or GD talking to spirits, or, talking snake to rib lady, whatever. It's all kind of nutty. And I think that if we just be honest about that, as opposed to like clutching our pearls and like saying, everything's a sacred cow and we can't be silly a little bit. We can't meet the spirituality when it's silly, the kind of sacred silliness. Then I don't think we're actually taking it that seriously. I think what we're doing is we're using the sacredness and we're using the holiness as a way of not taking the material seriously. And sacred cowing everything such that nothing is funny anymore, nothing can be weird and silly. Like that's not human anymore. And I think that there needs to be some, yeah. So I try to approach it with all that in mind. And again, it's not my place as an atheist or post-theist to hamstring the material, poison the well, such that people for whom esotericism and occultism are deeply felt spiritual practices can't use it. And I think anyone who does that, shame on them. Like, what hubris to gatekeep people's spirituality. What hubris. That stuff boggles my mind. It is not for me to do that, and it's not for anyone to do that. So I try to correct for that and do the opposite, hopefully.
I appreciate that perspective quite a bit, and I appreciate the humor and humility that you approach your subjects with. I was really struck by how you approached the subject of rune work and modern esoteric rune workers like myself. Mm-hmm. For my own part, I had never heard of Boreas, not once in all the years I've been researching rune work and all this. And so you gave me more rabbit holes to go down, and I appreciate that. And I really also appreciate that there's connecting lines now that I didn't know about before between runology as it exists in an academic sense and modern esoteric rune work. And there's all this interplay that I've seen hinted at in the academic texts that I've gotten a hold of, but it hasn't ever been really like deliberately spelled out in the way you did it. Mm-hmm. And, I think we kind of do have to laugh at ourselves. I mean, I believe in a god who tied his nuts to a goat to make a goddess laugh. So if we can't laugh at ourselves, that's an entire sacred story we may as well just chuck to the wind. And it's a really great one, too.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, again, like Thor cross-dressing to get his hammer back, and
right,
all these other kind of the Israelite god having breasts. Like the pun between Shaddad and Shaddad, right? The mountains and breasts, which is a great pun. It's like the most juvenile pun ever, and it's right there in the Bible. And no, it's I think that when our commitment to the sacred means that we become humorless, I think we've kind of betrayed the sacred. The sacred needs to have the power to in my opinion. Again, I'm very committed to the idea of the sacred, even if I'm not that to God. But I do think that that humor, sacred humor, is an incredibly important part of the equation. And I'm not willing to throw it under the bus, and I'm not willing to also, I find that people who use the sacred and the holy and all those kind of ideas as a way of like making stuff untouchable, I don't know they really understand anything. I've never found those people to be terribly convincing, honestly.
I know in Reclaiming Witchcraft, we do a lot of sacred play and sacred silliness, and there's a lot of cracks we take at ourselves about how sometimes rituals just kind of look like everybody acting like they're back in preschool. But I think this might be like, maybe this is a more modern idea, but it's very much with the practitioners that I've seen tied into a sort of like reconnection with the body and a reconnection with each other. Like in so many of the different traditions I've either passed through or put roots down in, where it seems like there's this sort of overall yearning for connection with the natural world, to the point where we stop thinking of humans as outside of nature, connection with each other to form community. And it's really difficult to be open to connection if you can't
You're
also
totally
crack a
right.
fart joke.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, the act of laughing. I mean, it's just like it's amazing. I don't get. And again, it's one of these funny things where I think it's a weird reaction to modernity, where religion lost its sense of humor. But you know, being Jewish myself, we never lost our sense of humor. I mean, fuck, dude, we had to deal with the fucking Holocaust. We laugh at that shit all the time. Like the amount of Anne Frank jokes I got up my sleeve, I'm rolling them out. Because again, like you laugh at the darkness. You laugh at the darkness, and the laughter is the light that vanishes the darkness. And if I can't roll out an Anne Frank joke, or whatever, what not doing this? Like, come on, like we got to have humor. It has to be funny. It has to be fun. And I totally agree with you. I think that the connection to our body is so important in spirituality, and I don't want to be connected to a body that can't laugh. That's not my body.
It occurs to me as I've been watching the Esoterica channel. Like so much of what you go into, whether it's the books you talk about or the artifacts, the physicality and the work that it would have taken to make these things. And a lot of these people were like, I'm thinking of the bowls, because I just watched this video like this morning. And the physicality of that bowl and the mixing of those communities, and how some have Hindu names in them and Aramaic and all these different mixes and mashes of different cultures coming together, and hiring these craft workers to make something with their hands that they can then physically put into their homes or bury with their dead. That for me is such an important piece of the puzzle, not only because it's the physicality of the object itself, but it's also like relationality, right? Because it's not just externalizing the relationship, it's also internalizing it in a very profound way.
Yeah, I'm again, this points back to I'm a Marxist. I mean, I'm not, it's not new to anyone. I'm a Marxist, and as Marxists, we're very concerned about labor. We're very concerned about production. We're very concerned about materiality. I'm a historical materialist, and if you want to bias in my channel, that's it. And I've made that abundantly clear on my website and in numerous interviews. It's no conspiracy that my political beliefs are what they are. That's where the bias shows. The bias shows in the fact that, for me personally, for me to really get incantation bowls, I got to have one. I need to see one. I need to get my hands. I need to look. I need to understand like what's going on with this thing. Where did it come from? Who made it? Like I have a whole. I copied out an entire sermon of Meister Eckhart by hand in calligraphy, 14th century calligraphy. Copied the entire sermon. It took me 6 weeks. Because when I really want to understand something, I got to do it. I have to like feel it in the ache in my back and my fingers. Materiality is where it's the foundation of my thought process, my life world. I'm a materialist, and so that's where I begin. Now, by the time you get to an esoteric episode, I've built that story up to sometimes a very abstract, very metaphysical, we're kind of in the clouds now. But for me, personally, that's where I begin. And I think that that's a place where hopefully, again, I'm not going to toot my own horn or whatever, but hopefully it's a place where many people who come to metaphysical concepts often come from a very high level layer of abstraction, from a very high level metaphysical connectionship to them. And I want to say, hey, look, there's this other material, there's the materiality of spirituality. And I'm not saying we need to stop there. I'm not a materialist in the sense of a bigoted materialist. It's just materiality. But to say there's at least a relationship here. And let's talk about the materiality of spirituality. And so, yeah, you look at the background, you see distillation apparatus. I don't talk about alchemy. I do it. I'm literally like, I can just move this far away from me. And here's a 17th century book of medical alchemy that I'm currently studying to reproduce some of these experiments. So, this book's coming apart. I got to, but you can see handwritten notes by the alchemists that owned it. So no, please. And so I guess what I'll conclude is to say that
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm not a person that if Esoterica offers something, and hopefully it offered many things, but one of the things I really wanted to offer is a glimpse into that foundational materiality, and also to show folks for whom the metaphysical and spiritual path, that it's very important to them, but also I hope to show that the materiality part is also super important and super interesting and super rich. There's a richness there, and that really matters. That matters to me. Also, I'm a working class kid. My dad was a pipe fitter. I grew up working with my hands. Like I just replumbed my bathroom. Like I'm a guy who, I'm a working class guy. And so when I look at those incantation bowls, it's not the demons that strike me first. It's asking, who made that bowl? How much did it cost? Where'd they get it from? Like, what's the intersection here with gender? Like, why bowls? That's a weird domestic product. Why is it written in the way that it's written the way it sounds, not the way it's written in texts? That tells me something about who's accessing it. So that stuff matters to me a lot. And hopefully, I'm able to, that's why often you'll see, like when I'm doing an episode on a magical manuscript, I'm showing you the manuscript on screen. Because I want you to see even if you can't read it, even if I don't want you to see a translation. I want you, because you can go read the translation. I want you to see, like, this is what the necromancer was looking at. This is the actual page. That matters to me a whole lot. Those kinds of things are deeply important to me.
So there's one kind of materiality that I find myself thinking about a lot, but that I don't know that you've addressed in your videos directly yet. And it's bioregion. Because one of the things that I've noticed going through the grimoires and going through like the ancient Eastern Mediterranean, especially, is just how much people's relationship to the world, like the physical world around them, makes this huge difference in the practice. So like, if you're near the ancient Mediterranean, there's going to be a story about there's a serpent in the ocean that's like super scary and primordial, and then the thunder guy comes by and calms down the sea. And so it paints this really interesting picture that's very vivid of, even though I've never been to this area, where the winds come in, the sea gets choppy, it thunders, the sea calms down. And it's just another thing about, I was even thinking about with the incantation bowls, when I did watch that video, about how much does a dry climate make this a good idea to do, as compared to some of the other home protection things that we've seen where people are using like wood or small scraps of animal parchment.
No, you're absolutely right. And
Was
I have
it
tried
something
to, when
ahead.
that stuff can get really speculative really fast. And also I try to be really rooted in the academic literature so that I'm not introducing my own speculation. So that's one piece of that puzzle. I'll give two examples where I've tried to focus on that stuff. One is the Yahweh material, where I focused on Yahweh, where we see Yahweh originating as a god of thunderstorms, but being acclimated to a god of coastal storms, Baal. And that's an interesting transition, where two different kinds of storm gods associated with two different kinds of storms, because of their regionality, get fused at one point in the case of Yahweh. The other one that I think I dealt with, which is interesting, is a recent episode I did on Paracelsus. And one of the things we forget about Paracelsus, or maybe we forget about it, we don't know, whatever, is that in the medical literature of the time, and we're thinking about Germany here, right? That so main medical manuals written, as you mentioned, like in the Mediterranean, they get kicked over to Baghdad. That's where we get Ibn Sina writing his stuff. Well, the stuff available in Baghdad is not available in the Mediterranean. So there's a substitution program that happens. The herbs and the stuff that was originally written by Galen and those guys, they go to Baghdad. You have all these substitution herbs that are brought in because they just don't have those herbs. Well, that material gets brought from Ibn Sina into Northern Europe. And then there's an entire another genre of literature that's substitution literature for those substitutions. So by the time the Galenic theory of medicine makes its way back to Europe, you have 2 layers of substitutions for many of the herbs and remedies that go on in that. And Paracelsus's argument is we have substitutions for substitutions for substitutions for herbs that we don't even know what the names originally meant anymore. Like, we don't even know what we're doing. Like, how is this medicine? You're just making stuff up. We need to start from scratch. And so how do we start from scratch? We go to the local, and he again, it's misogynistic, but he said, let's go to the ignorant local women because they're not polluted with all this substitution stuff. They know exactly what herbs in this region work for those specific kinds of ailments. So let's start from the ground up. And so that was a neat place where Paracelsus, I think, was right. He was right for the wrong reasons. Women aren't a blank slate or some stupid stuff like that. They have long traditions, and but he was right for the wrong reasons or something. And so that's a place where I've tried to also incorporate that, and that's a place where I think the scholarship about Paracelsus has really pointed to something very revolutionary in his ideas. So yeah, I do think that there is a kind of, you're absolutely right to talk about that the materiality of region, terroir, really does matter. And insofar as the scholarship provides it to me, I'm always happy to include it. It's just a case where it can be often highly speculative, and that's a place where I'm not going to do that speculation because it's not, in my opinion, it's not responsible for me to do that kind of speculation.
I'm just thinking on the point of view, talking about sort of concerns of being speculative and such. How do you, when it comes to writing an episode of Esoterica, how do you navigate that in terms of it being accessible? And I suppose some degree of being entertaining is probably in your mind as well when it comes to writing for YouTube, rather than it being an academic report in the sense of kind of you hear, university lecturers complain when they get an essay submitted, they don't just want a bunch of quotes. Right. They want, critique of the quotes, analysis of the quotes, and so on. How do you kind of navigate that when it comes to writing Esoterica with that mindfulness of not being too speculative yourself?
I stick pretty close to the literature. I stick pretty close to the consensus of the literature. People often don't realize you're not hearing my voice. Very rarely do you hear me. I'm really trying to speak to the consensus of the literature. And when there is a serious debate, either among scholars or among scholars and occultists, I try to name that debate. And sometimes I'll weigh in about whether I think one side is more reasonable or whatever. But, sometimes people say things like, oh, your channel is nonsense because you constantly contradict yourself. I'm like, I'm not contradicting myself. I'm telling you what the consensus of scholarship is on a range of topics, of which of course there'll be contradictions because that's what scholarship is. It's a big debate and a big conversation. I'm not trying, this is not the Justin Sledge show. And here, let me tell you what Justin Sledge thinks about Enochian. I'm happy to do that in live streams or interviews or whatever. And people want to ask me, I'm happy to say, but, that's what I try to do. It's what I call a diplomatic approach. And the diplomatic approach means approach consensus as much as possible, but where there are live debates, name those debates, and settle into this. I'll give an example. In the Enochian material with the Liber Loga, there's a debate among occultists about whether or not the Enochian material is part of an apocalyptic process or causes the apocalyptic process. It's a big debate. And I don't know what I believe about that. I could think about it more and say something if anyone cares, and occultists shouldn't care what I think because I'm not an occultist. But I name it. I name the fact that there's a debate. Also, the way that the holy table should be laid out. There's a huge debate about the holy table, where Peterson thinks it should go one way, and Duquette and other people think it should go the other way. I have an opinion about that. I don't know that it matters, but the truth of the matter is, at least what I'm told, people have built it both ways and had success scrying. So who am I to judge? I'm not to judge, but it is a debate. And what I try to do is, again, do a diplomatic approach, approaching this consensus of scholars, and then naming debates when they emerge. And again, I weigh in when I think that there's a good reason for me to weigh in. If I have a unique insight, because I'm not a stupid person, I think I know something about this. So if I think I have something data driven and evidence based as a reason to weigh in, I do that. But yeah, I try to keep myself on mute a lot, and I think that's what good educators do. They keep themselves on mute and they let the genius of the scholarship talk through them. And when they come off mute, you need to come off mute for a damn good reason. What is it? The Dalai Lama or somebody, I don't know, Rumi, some person smarter than me said, be careful to spoil the silence.
I'm curious if over everything you've done so far in Esoterica, you have a particularly kind of favorite topic or favorite kind of area or branch or something that you've covered. I get the impression that sort of the Kabbalah and the Zohar are very much kind of up there for you, but does something else sort of trump that? Or
So it's funny, I've never done, everyone thinks I've done a lot of episodes in the Zohar, but I've never done even a single one. I've only done a study of the Zohar with Zevi, but I've never actually done a Zohar episode because it intimidates the ever living fuck out of me. Um, um, yeah, the Kabbalah stuff, it's okay. I'm not, I have a funny relationship to Kabbalah in a lot of ways. I could talk more about that maybe. Any, I'll say my favorite episodes are episodes where um, I can show how esotericism isn't as esoteric as people think, where it like actually does function in a very important way in the history of the intellectual and spiritual and philosophical world. Um, I did that recently with this episode on nominalism and realism, where I showed like, hey, this had a huge impact in philosophical development that no one talks about. That was it was a fun one for me to do because I get to do a little flexing of my philosophy chops, which I love to do that. Um, I think my favorite ones also are to dig into material that people think they know to show that it's actually much more complicated or rich or different. And I did an episode on the Bornless ritual. It's a very important ritual in Thelema and Golden Dawn stuff. And I sat down with Dr. Kirsten Schwitze, an amazing scholar, and we sat down with 3 hours, worked through that entire piece of papyrus. And I did that because I think Liber Samech is an important is an interesting document in the history of occultism. Liber Samech, Crowley's Liber Samech it's kind of the shortcut to get to the HGA in Thelema. It's one way of getting to the HGA that's not the Abramelin. In fact, in many ways, it's sort of a supercharged Abramelin or something like that. And it is an important part of people's spirituality, especially Thelema people. And I felt like the literature on that text was just not good. Just not good. And I was like, all right, people are doing this. This is a thing that people are doing, and it is transforming their lives. And if I'm going to do an episode, I want to be hyper responsible to the fact that this is a living spiritual tradition. And the task that I wanted to take on was to be as absolutely exhaustive as possible to provide modern occult practitioners every single piece of the data I could, so that they would be able to use that in whatever way made sense to them. So that those episodes feel really important to me, you know. And again, a 3 hour long deep dive on what is basically 2 pages of papyrus. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Kirsten and I, Dr. Spitz and I read that in Greek. We did critical apparatus. We really busted our ass on it because we wanted to present it in a way to enable people, because people for whom that is a spiritual practice, that matters. And half-assing that stuff is not an option. Because you're really betraying a population, a spiritual population. It's not, and maybe back in the day that was a thing that was okay, but I'm not gonna. That's not me. I'm not doing that. But yeah, that kind of material really matters to me, and I try to take it very seriously.
I mean, to a point Sarah made earlier, I know sort of he's not the only heathen, sort of myself included, and sort of various acquaintances and such who felt that way about your recent-ish video on the runes and Boreas and such. That the way you were sort of approaching that, bringing to light things that maybe some of us knew and others had no idea about, and maybe heathenry at large has no idea about when it comes to the runes, because of these misconceptions of this kind of ancient tradition that isn't actually necessarily there.
And also that antiquity is not a indicator of spiritual importance or spiritual validity. That the Zohar is a 13th century text. That doesn't make it not important. Doesn't make it not spiritually powerful, because it's not whatever. Yeah. And I try to approach that episode with a great deal of humility. Maybe is one word, but again, it's just like I want to give people the connective tissue to say, like, I know people for whom the runes are incredibly important, and I want to give them that technique. Also, I will say that the literature out there about Boreas is bad. Like. It's wrapped up in some dark, bad Nazi garbage, and that's just so terrible to me, because people deserve access to this material that's not filtered through dirt bags. I don't know, like, and again, it's not for me to do it, but when I went to the literature, I was like, oh God. And I was like, all right, so this is what this is going to look like. And I'll be very honest. What it looked like was I took the literature that I looked at and I was like, this is bad. And I didn't read it. I just didn't read it because I just didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want to have it be influenced by it. And I just translated the material myself. I don't read Swedish, so I had access to 2 Latin manuscripts. And so they're both relatively late, so they're good examples of Boreas's text. I checked spotty stuff with Philip Holm from Let's Talk Religion. So he's obviously he speaks Swedish. He's a Swede, and I checked the Swedish manuscript where I had problems with it, and I was like, I'm doing this from the ground up, because this is what the community deserves. They don't deserve me reading this material through the lens of Nazis and then reporting it back to them. They deserve to. I was like, okay, all right, Sledge, like, let's do this. Let's get eyes on it. Let's do it.
Because I think
I just wanted to express my appreciation for that, because it's one thing to say, oh, just do your own research, but when I literally can't read Latin and I can't read the original manuscripts, and the only manuscripts that I would have access to would be Nazi or Nazi influenced works, I cannot tell you what that means to me that you went through all that work. Because while I'm not practicing the way that Boreas would have practiced, and the noble runes aren't really my jam, it's good to see where some of these influences lie, and it's really good to see where some of the research got started and what it was trying to point to and how. Because for a good chunk of us in the esoteric realm of things, so for my part, I try to avoid as much as I can anything that's Blum influence, or Blue, I can't remember how you pronounce his name. But I'm also trying at the same time to avoid anything that's Guido von List influenced.
Yeah.
And so trying to walk that narrow path sometimes, especially with these older sources, gets really tricky because the only things that are translated to English is the Nazi stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, just talking off from that, Justin, I know in our communities, kind of two big problems we have are things coming from Nazis. I mean, heathenry, especially a lot of modern heathenry, would basically a lot of that came from Nazis. And so it's kind of working around that, seeing, what is salvageable, what isn't, and how it sort of how we navigate that. But also another big problem that we have is appeal to history. And sort of your point there, sort of things being more recent, things being medieval, things being Renaissance, doesn't mean that they don't have merit or value or worth. Which is one thing I appreciate a lot about a lot of the stuff that you cover, is that you are sort of pointing out the merit, value, worth in a lot of sort of medieval and Renaissance things.
Yeah. I guess I believe traditions are alive. Traditions are not, there wasn't, I'll speak to myself. It wasn't like back in the day we had it all right. Like traditions are about growth in life. And if that growth and life is happening right now, that's great. Like, again, we don't have to buy into this sort of Prisca theologia concept that old is good. Um, I think I think there's lots of reasons not to do that. And also, again, as a person, I'm a deeply traditional person. I'm a traditionalist in many ways, not in quarter of the, Avila, whatever. I'm a traditionalist. I really believe in the power of tradition, and I really think the tradition is the thing that needs to be brought to the table. And also, tradition sometimes is just peer pressure from dead people. Like, it's not really good. It's just like dead uncle racist, like that's tradition. Like, that's the ancestors. Like, yeah, a lot of your ancestors were trash. A lot of my ancestors were trash. And like, do I want to have a relationship with the ancestors? Absolutely. But do I want to go to the Talmud and read where, I don't know, Shimon Bar Yochai goes on some long spiel about how evil the goyim are, and the only good goy is the goy, only the goys and the snake have the same thing in common. They're both better without a head. I'm like, fuck this guy. This is evil, a racist bastard. This is the racist uncle on Facebook. He's just a racist uncle on Facebook from 2,000 years ago. Like, I don't need to get with that. But is he in the ancestry? Yeah, he's back there. And so I think that I'm not opposed to going back to our traditions and going back to history. But the idea that the ancestors had it right and we have to aspire to the ancestors, this is weird essentializing Platonism stuff. And it's certainly the case that we are getting some things right. They got things wrong. And also we need to be real careful when we abandon ancestral tradition, because there could have been there is likely real wisdom in the survivalship of those customs. And in my tradition in Judaism, we have a saying, right? The tradition needs to have a vote, but not a veto. It needs to have a vote, but not a veto. So the tradition tells me things like, I need to not do X, Y, and Z. And I'm going to take that very seriously until it becomes antithetical to other values that I hold to be important. For instance, the tradition says things like, whatever, stone people to death who commit adultery. I'm like, okay, let's figure that out. Let's figure something out. But at the same time, when the tradition says the tradition should have a vote, not a veto, what that means to me is that I have to do the work to bring the tradition to the table. I need to learn the tradition to bring it to the table to get that vote. And it's only when I've done all that work to steel man the tradition to get it that vote, then and only then do I get the veto moment. I could say, this is the reasoning of the tradition. Great. And then at that moment, I'm like, and also this is not an excuse to be homophobic. Like, they have a lot of reasons why they're homophobic. They're all bad reasons. Sorry. And so I think that there's a relationship that way. For me, tradition matters a lot. I want to, I'm very lucky in that I can go downstairs, I can pick up a book, and I can hear my ancestors speaking in their ancestral languages, which is now my ancestral language. That's a super big luxury I have. I'm very thankful for it. But that don't make them right. Doesn't make them good. Just makes them the ancestors. And tradition is important, but it is not. It is not a. It is not a place where I get to justify my, whatever bigotry or these kind of things. So I think this is how for me, is how I want to relate to the material. I want to, still like Boreas. Like, do I buy Boreas? No, but does he deserve to get his day in the sun and get an honest show? Sure, sure. I'm happy to do that.
Just thinking there on your point on, because you mentioned your kind of Jewish background, Jewish heritage and stuff, and culture and tradition and so on. I would assume you have some kind of awareness of the kind of conversations in much of modern day occultism and modern day paganism around appropriation from Jewish culture and such, whether it's Lilith or whether it's Kabbalah and such. I was wondering if you would be able to share your thoughts around that.
I think that it cuts two ways for me. Insofar as the book has been published, it's in the public domain. It's out there. And if a Jewish person publishes a book in Hebrew or not, it's out there. And that means that if other people want to do the work of translating it and incorporating it in their spirituality, I think that's just cultural exchange. That's just how cultural exchange happens. Is that symmetrical cultural exchange? No, but it rarely ever is symmetrical. And I think, and having an expectation of symmetric cultural exchange is probably not realistic. So that's the first part. So if someone wants to go read the Zohar or Lilith, Lilith's documents or Sefer Yetzirah, and they find that to be spiritually impactful for them, that's it. It is. That's the risk you run of publishing things. Like if you don't want your stuff out there, don't put it out there. That's the long and short of things. The second thing is, if you want to identify strongly with Kabbalah, with strong with Kabbalah, it would just seem weird if you didn't want to be in some kind of relationship with the local Jewish community for whom that is the spiritual path of that religion. And if you don't want to be involved with them, you might want to ask yourself why. Is there some kind of fear or anti-Semitism or just intimidation? Like you're just intimidated. That's a legitimate thing to feel. But I feel like for anyone for whom Kabbalah is an important part of their spirituality, reach out to your local rabbi that you feel comfortable with. Whether there's a lot of different kind of rabbis. There's like my rabbi who's like super queer friendly, queer centering. Like she's going to kick you over to me because she doesn't know the first thing about Kabbalah. She thinks it's all a bunch of horseshit, but she's going to be like, go talk to Beardo over here. And or the local Chabad rabbi, whatever, so for me, it's like a squaring a circle thing. Look, anything that is published in English or even in Hebrew or Aramaic, I think that anyone should feel free to incorporate that in spirituality, because the Jews that published it, like it's out there. At the same time, if it is the case that you are finding yourself drifting in the direction of Kabbalah as an important part of your spirituality, yeah, I think you need to approach the Jewish community that you feel most comfortable with, and just build a relationship, because the truth of the matter is, it is asymmetric. This is an oppressed spirituality. It has been. I mean, there are entire schools of Kabbalah that will have been literally murdered out of existence, just murdered out of existence. And so, relationships matter, and I would say that build those relationships if you can. So it's not for me to say that Kabbalah is a closed practice. I don't believe that. I believe that when you publish things, it ain't closed. Um, and also I believe that relationships matter. And I think that those two things have some kind of relationship, and it's important to follow that out. Um, but yeah, also I'm anti-gatekeeper. I'm also, for me, Kabbalah is a spiritual technology, and I'm teaching it. And I've gotten emails, angry emails from, Kabbalists, Jewish Kabbalists. How dare you publish our secrets? I'm like, me publish them? Y'all, we published them. You can get the book on Amazon, bro. Like, Achi, like what do you do? Achi, like it's the book is on Amazon, huh? Like the secrets, huh? Raza to Raza. Like, come on, it's $14 on Amazon. Raza to Raza, like, come on, let's do this. So yeah, I find that stuff. Yeah, I find that gatekeeping stuff, to be not. I don't find it actually coming from an intellectually rich place. I often find it coming from a performative place. Like, also when I see non-Jewish people being like, "Let's protect the Jews," I'm like, yeah, I appreciate that, but like, that's not. We need to have a more nuanced conversation around that. Now, if you ask me the same thing about Native American traditions or Amazonian traditions, well, I would say absolutely nothing, because that is for Amazonian people, Native American people, and other people to key in on. But I can say with Jewish traditions, man, look, man, you publish it ain't secret, dude. Sorry, I don't know what to tell you. I don't get to make the rules. Like, it's on Amazon.
Yeah. As a person who is a Thelemite and like Hermetic Kabbalah is very central to Thelema, I have so many other complaints about the way we handle Hermetic Kabbalah besides the cultural appropriation um question. Um I definitely appreciate your insight on it for sure. I know also for me, like there are Jewish people in some of my communities, and I have heard them repeatedly say that some of the ways in which they see it get thrown around irritate them. And it's some of the same reason why I'm also pushing back is I've seen a lot of people skip steps because Hermetic Kabbalah is tradition at this point. I turn to them and I'll ask them, are you basically just using the Neoplatonic spheres? Why do you have to do this? If there's so many other ways of verifying a vision or a message you've received that's not gematria, why are you using specifically gematria? Especially if you're a person who doesn't hold Genesis to be a sacred text. Like if you turn to me and you're like, well, in Genesis 1:1, that's fine. But I've seen a lot of people be intellectually lazy and like not really sit with the question, because the idea of having to figure out a different way of doing it or sitting down and figuring out why does it feel this way to me is like it's like a multi-decade long
Sure.
mystical magical quest,
Yeah,
right?
I would also say this is going to sound more critical than I'm meaning it to sound. Like, Bennett was an amazing scholar. Like, Bennett, who basically wrote 777, Crowley stole it from Bennett. And Bennett was an amazing scholar. 777 is a bad book. It just needs to be updated. It's just
I
bad.
hate
It's just
777
like
so much.
and again, I'm not saying it's bad because it's like malevolent. It's just like bad. It's scholarship. It's very high quality amateur scholarship of the late 19th century. And I'm not opposed to Hermetic Kabbalah. And I want to make this really clear. I'm not opposed to Hermetic Kabbalah. I'm not opposed to people taking Kabbalistic stuff and doing, I don't know what they'll do with it. Like, in the same way that like I see like modern queer folks like, we're gonna queer Kabbalah. I'm like, well, you're late to the game because it's already real queer. Like good luck. Queer it more than it already is. For me, the point is I'm not opposed to 777. I'm just opposed to the fact that 777 hasn't been updated. That kind, like, people, like, Thelemites are smart people. They're some of the smartest people I've ever met. They're super smart people. And to me, the problem with the Hermetic Kabbalah is not Hermetic Kabbalah as a project. The problem for me with Hermetic Kabbalah is that it just hasn't been updated. No one's like no one's taken 100 years of scholarship of super smart people and like it's like you're driving around a Model T that's half broke down and half old parts and to me I'm like, yeah, 777 is great because Bennett was a genius. Also, he jumped ship, became a Buddhist, and that was it for him. Like, just like update the thing with modern scholarship on Kabbalah, with modern scholarship on chakras, on what we now know about Eastern religion. And if the system breaks, then it breaks. Like that's just how innovation goes. I don't think it necessarily has to break. To me, the problem is just that it's a sort of it's exactly what I think of as the opposite of what Thelema is about, which is sort of like radical innovation and like really the aim of religion, the method of science. Okay, good. Like y'all got the aim of religion, great. Like method of science, like so yeah, I'm not opposed to the Hermetic Kabbalah at all. And sometimes people think I am, but what I am opposed to is like intellectual laziness. And I think simply using 777 as a crutch when it could be updated and I think made amazingly powerful as a ritual text, that to me is like I'm going to sound like someone's mother, like it's disappointing. I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed.
I have so many complaints about 777. I'm gonna let myself have one of them as a treat. Modernism is dead. So the idea that every single association has to fit onto one table is like, it's not the 1800s anymore. We don't do one size fits all. It's 2024. Everything is like atomized and like micro adjusted. And so we can't think of magical associations and give people a starter text for start with these associations, build your own experience, make your own 777 in 20 years after you've done 50 bazillion hours of ritual.
Sure.
It just needs to have separate cross sections to me. And Agrippa does this. He has orders of number. So the orders of 4, the order of 7, the order of 12, right? And so we can't have this idea of like different cross sections where from this perspective, these are the things that go together. From this perspective, these are the things that go together. And to try and stick, what is it? 32 rows and everything has to go on the same table. It sounds like someone is trying to play Kesha, Bach, and like peanut butter jelly time on a loop at the same time. You can make Kesha and Bach work. You could remix Bach and peanut butter jelly time. You can do Kesha and peanut butter jelly time. But all three of them at the same, you're not going to hear anything useful. And like we can't add just a tiny bit of like some kind of, I don't know if that counts as like post-structuralism or postmodernism to
No,
the way that we think about
it's not even post
magical
anything. It's
associations.
just Renaissance thinking. Like it's Agrippa. Like you're just asking to go back to Agrippa. Like you're not, you're not post anything. You're pre.
That's hilarious. I'm like, you're not my real dad.
Yeah.
Go and grab the book
Grandpa
from Grandpa. Grandpa.
This is great to somebody who's not at all involved in these particular waters hearing this, because as an esoteric rune worker, we're having this live discussion right now between folks who are clinging really hard to the 70s and 80s authors of runic esotericism, like Edward Thorson / Stephen Flowers, and that whole
those cats.
Yeah, those guys. So, and then in the modern day, where we're having these live discussions, where I'm like, a part of this discussion I'm having is like, okay, but go back to the rune poems. What did they actually say? We have better translations. We have updated.
We have digitized manuscripts.
Right. Use them, please.
Yeah, again, you guys will see this. You see this on Esoterica. Like I go back to manuscripts. Like for me, I don't. I'm not playing telephone. Like if I want to show you manuscripts, like you look in the details of the whatever in the videos I do, you can link to the manuscript looked at.
Right.
You know, I'm not and sometimes people get intimidated by that kind of stuff, but I'm like, look, yeah, it looks a little hard to learn to read this. And I even I think I did early on the channel, I think celebrating 1,000 subscribers. I did an episode where I literally go through and like, this is how to read a medieval book of magic, like letter by letter. And it's the most teeth pulling episode I think I've ever done. But I'm like, this is how I do it. Like I consult manuscripts. Every episode in which there is a manuscript where I consult the manuscript. Um, because I don't want to, I want to, again, it's accessibility. Like we all can do this. I'm not special. My dad was a pipe fitter. I remember hanging black pipe for sprinkler systems in rooms where my dad said, this room will be so expensive, we'll never be able to stay there. It's a Hilton Garden now. Like it's not that, like that's how poor we were, you know, and I'm like, this is not, I'm not special. I'm not, I don't have magic powers. I don't have anything that anyone else doesn't have. I have hard work. I have maybe some autism. I have like, I have, it's funny. My daughter, Naila is on the spectrum. She's being diagnosed, which I have a lot of complicated feelings about because I think that diagnosis becomes destiny for so many people. And I really don't buy that. I think that neurodivergence is normal. Um, like there is no normal. Neurodivergence is what is normal. And I see my daughter, I see her memory developing the way mine does. And I have an eidetic memory. I have a very strange memory. Like I won't remember this conversation tomorrow. I just don't remember conversations. What I do remember is pages of books, and I see entire books in my head. I see, it's like photographs, and it's funny. One time, yeah. Anyway, I see that kind of stuff, and what I'm pointing to is I'm not special. I'm not this kind of the people think what I do is exceptional. And what I want to drive home to people is that you can do it. These manuscripts are, if you want to learn Latin and read a medieval manuscript, you could do that in a year. And I say a year, I mean an hour a day. And if you were dedicating an hour a day, you could read any medieval manuscript by the end of that year. It's totally possible. It sucks. It's not fun. It, but it's a thing that you can take with you forever. And again, to go back to the rune poems and stuff. Was it Codex Regius?
Yeah.
Right. Codex Regius is in a really good hand, all things told. You could learn Old Norse from someone like Jackson Crawford. He's offering classes now. You could learn to read epigraphy, and you could read Codex Regius yourself within a year. That's possible. So this stuff is just not as inaccessible as people think. It's not as out there. And that's
it's not as esoteric as people
it's
make
not
it
it's
out to
not
be.
as it's not as esoteric as people think. And again, I think that this is the thing that scholars have done. They've systematically made people feel disempowered so that they can be empowered. And I don't want to have anything to do with that. I want to be an educator who empowers people to know that I'm not special and that you can do this. It's not easy, but I'm not special, and no one else who does this is special. It's just a task. And like the time it takes people to learn to play the new Fortnite game or Minecraft or whatever, I don't know what games are out now. If you spent half that time, like sometimes I think like, how many episodes of Downton Abbey have I seen? I don't know, a lot. I love Downton Abbey. But if I spent a tenth of that working on my Ugaritic, I would probably be the best Ugariticist out there. And it's just a question of time management priorities.
I think for me, as somebody who will probably continue to rely on your scholarship for as long as you make it available, right? I definitely see time management priorities is exactly part of it, right? The 10 minutes a day that I could be spending learning to read Latin manuscripts, I'm instead spending learning, first off, how to perform the
Sure.
Gnostic Mass, because that's going to be part of my ordination, but also how to do pastoral counseling. What do you do when someone is having a meltdown in front of you, of the various shades of meltdown human beings can have? And in that moment, what does your spirituality have to offer someone who may not even have the same practice as you? And that takes a lot of small conversations and a lot
Absolutely.
of building of a different skill set. So that's, I think, time management priorities is part of it. Part of it is
Sure.
also not even knowing what questions to ask. Like, I remember when you did the Almondel video, I didn't even know. I didn't even know that I didn't even know. And now I am looking at so many people who have holy sacred tablecloths with things on them, right? Like names of corner guardians, images of goddesses, whatever. And it's like the holy
Yeah.
sacred tablecloth. And I'm like, it's the modern almondel. You don't get a brass table because we don't have that kind of money. You get a tablecloth. You either print or paint something on it, and then you
Yeah.
put candles on the
No,
corners. Et
and let me also
voila.
say a deep thank you for that kind of like chaplaincy work. My God, how important that kind of work is. Like it's work I can't do. I don't have it in me to do that kind of work, and like my partner does. And just from the bottom of my heart, thanks so much for that kind of work. Like that kind of work is like, I live in my head and I can do the head work, but the heart work I'm not so good at. Like it's just like it's just not for me. I'm not good at it. And just I want to see you and acknowledge that the importance of that work. It's just division of labor. It's some of us are going to be good at this, some of us are good at that, and like, and that's why it's very important for me when I know that there are people out there, for instance, training in chaplaincy. My God, chaplaincy, where you're putting your time to do that incredibly holy work, and you're like bringing what you're bringing to that. I got to do my damn good work. Yeah, I need to really work hard to make sure I'm like nailing it with the Almadale, episode, because at some level I can muck up the Almadale episode. I can muck it up. I can fix it later. I can do another one or whatever. But I think of my chaplaincy people who are like talking to people who are in extreme crisis. You can't muck that up, or whatever. Like maybe you do, and you can't. There's no way you can't not. Everyone's gonna muck stuff up. So I totally get it. We're all not gonna do the same thing. We're all here quilting together technologies of spirituality, and we're all gonna bring to the table what we bring, and it's gonna be flawed. It's gonna be human. It's going to be what it is. And I can only hope from my part that I'm providing the best service I can in terms of intellectual rigor and all that stuff. Because again, like I think about it on two ways, right? Like if I can inform a D&D dungeon master to make a really great D&D game that like really brings people together in a famine of loneliness. And we are living in a famine of loneliness. Or if I can empower someone who's a chaplain to have a technology to reach someone in a moment of crisis or whatever, I'm doing my part, and it's a small part, and I'm happy to do it. Um, but yeah, I don't expect everyone to read medieval manuscripts. That is not a realistic expectation at all. Um, and I'm not even doing that most of the time. I'm not publishing Keffer's CMA 49. I'm not doing that. Um, but yeah, it's just I think that there's a thing. Maybe what I'm saying is there's a weird idea among people that you have to be like a genius to do this stuff with manuscripts and languages and all this. And I'm like, yeah, you got to be smart to some degree, but it's a trick. Like it's a skill. It's like I can't skateboard or play the piano, but I bet if I tried, I could bang out something. Wouldn't be good, but it'd be okay. But same thing, same with this stuff. Even less so, I think, than piano. So it's yeah, I think that people often have an inflated idea. And again, and I'm not saying that it's because people have it. I'm saying intellectuals have made people feel that way. Look how smart I am. I'm like, you ain't that smart. Like you just like you had a fancy education that your parents were born into money and you're at Cambridge and you got Latin because you had to. And yeah. So yeah, I guess what I'm pointing to, that's what I want to point to is that it's not as inaccessible as people often think it is.
And that kind of makes me think of something you were sort of talking about earlier on in the conversation, where you really appreciate the physicality of a lot of the material you get into, the physical products and sort of the tangible aspects of all of this. And so, if anything, I would have a slight disagreement with what you just said about yourself being very intellectual about all of this, because actually you're pointing out how grounded all of these things are and how applicable and practicable a lot of this stuff is. Again, in sort of pagandom, occultdom, and such, we have the issue of a lot of kind of armchair thinkers and navel gazers and stuff, and sort of encouraging people to, if they're going to have an esoteric practice, to have it atop an exoteric practice. If they're going to get really into the mysticism, to have it on top of some kind of domestic religious setup framework, however that manifests for them. And so you looking into these kind of lofty metaphysical topics or esoteric materials or such, but in a way that is very much showing the tangible physical aspects and the very real world sort of ripples that manifested from these ideas coming forth, really helps there.
I hope so. These spiritual practices and technologies didn't come out of nowhere, and they didn't go into nowhere. And to situate them in their historical, material, philosophical context, yeah, I think that again, it makes them reasonable. It makes them approachable. It makes them not bizarre. And I think that's sometimes people don't like that because they kind of want it to be bizarre because it's sort of this edgy thing. I'm like, like it's not so edgy as you think it is. But also it's a way for academics to throw it under the bus and be like, oh, this is not worth studying because it's bizarre. I'm like, no, like we're bizarre. We're a disconnected, atomized group of people staring at screens. Like we're bizarre. Ancient people weren't bizarre. Medieval people weren't bizarre. They were in tight-knit communities of meaning making. We're the exception, not them. Um, so yeah, to me, it's not a thing about. Um, it doesn't. I don't have to work hard to make esotericism meaningful, and I just have to do history, and that's what is so shocking about historians and people is that they don't want to cover this stuff. I'm like, it's not because they're bizarre; it's because we're bizarre.
Throughout a lot of this conversation, I really appreciate that you kind of like really bring it back to us not being spectacular, just being human. I appreciate that because it really grounds the material we've talked about. It grounds the material that your channel is about. It is something that I try to really emphasize with people when they're approaching the old sources, whether it's for esoteric reasons or just trying to figure out why people did the things they did. You know, why would you bend a sword in half and toss it in the bog if it was a perfectly serviceable sword? Well, there must be a meaning behind that. Let's talk about it. And so, you know, that reaching back to the human, that reaching back to the dead, the ancestors, through what they left, through what they indicated, through what they felt was important to write down, to preserve, to bury. The care with which so much of this is done, for me, has been something that's been really striking. Whether you're talking about the incantation bowls or the buried goods in grave mounds, or whether you're talking about some formerly lost key that made everything click in place as to how we could understand this language, that language. Like the Rosetta Stone, for instance. Like, what was important? Why were they writing this down? What did it mean? What's the purpose here? And I think, it's that connection point, right? That inflection point between us struggling to understand or perfectly understanding, depending on context, and reaching back and pulling forward, right? Because at the same time that we're reaching, and the ancestors, in a sense, are reaching towards us, and we're kind of pushing and pulling and trying to understand. For me, that's a very human process. And it speaks to, I think, the breadth and the beauty that so many of these things, whether you're looking at these artifacts that were found in a treasure mound or a cave, or these things carry meaning even if we're not connecting with them in the same way today. Mm-hmm. And I find that sometimes the profundity makes my head spin.
Yeah, I think there's an anecdote to that too. The anecdote is what we call in scholarship the survivalship bias, which is to say that what survived is just what survived. It's not actually an indicator of what was popular or what was normal or what was anything.
Right.
And I'll give two examples of this that I love. The first is the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls survived, but that community was really weird. Like, no one else did Judaism like them. They weren't representative of anyone but them. And to think that somehow they're the ancestors, that would be a terrible idea because they're just the weirdos in the desert. It just so happened that accidentally that survived, and that's what we have. The other example is Beowulf. Beowulf, we look at, we look at Beowulf and think, Anglo-Saxon literature there, boy. No one read Beowulf. Beowulf was never quoted by any other text in history. Beowulf is never even named by any other book. It's only the section of like Gudrun and stuff in Beowulf that anyone knows anything about. And the only part of that manuscript that it seems like anyone really read was the part where he fights the dragon at the end. No one knew about Beowulf. He was not a big deal. The story was not a big deal. No one cared, so far as we can tell from history. Until J.R.R. Tolkien decides that Beowulf is the best thing ever. Because he's an old English, and now we all fucking read Beowulf. Like, Beowulf doesn't indicate anything about anything. It
doesn't hurt that he showed up in chainmail to do his lectures.
Quite the showman. But it's just one of these funny things where we think Beowulf doesn't tell us anything about. It even happened, it happens in Denmark. It's not. It tells us something about scribal culture. It tells us something about those scribes. Something about Old English. It turns out whatever. But yeah, the survivalship bias is a strange thing, and people say things like, "Well, like we have all these manuscripts from Egypt, the Nag Hammadi Library, and all this, that, and Oxyrhynchus." I'm like, yeah, that tells us about those parts of Egypt. Does it tell us about Christianity? No. And so the survivalship bias is a peculiar thing. And when you pull bodies out of bogs, is it the triple death? I don't know. Like, so yeah, I think that there's two ways this cuts. Yes, like we have all these amazing artifacts that have survived, and they do tell us something. Incantation bowls, bog bodies, whatever. But survivalship is not an indicator of popularity. I mean, the rune poems are a great example. We have 3 different versions of the rune poems, and they don't agree. We don't understand what some of them mean. And it's not even clear that, again, like just because literate people were writing that down is no indicator that everyday people knew anything about these. So, in the same way that like ask common people at the grocery store what the last major article in the Atlantic was. If they don't know, then there's a good indication that no one knew what the rune poems were because it was written by some monk or whatever. So yeah, this is always a problem when it comes to literature. Like, on the one hand, we can only work with survives. On the other hand, the survivalship bias is a real thing. And squaring that circle is just super tough. And I think I gave this example in the Yahweh episode. I'm like, yeah, we have Ugaritic text describing the Baal myth. Like we have that. But that tells us about what Ugaritic aristocrats cared about. It doesn't tell us what Ugaritic shamans were doing and or whatever. Um, so yeah, it's a mess. It's a bit of a mess. But again, scholars have to work with what we work with, and that's what we have.
One of the interesting ways in which I see people deal with survivalship bias is placing a text in modernity and like
Yeah.
contemporary instead of having it in its historical place. So like Thunder
Sure.
Perfect
Absolutely.
Mind slaps, right? A QED, like that's it. I don't think about it as being representative of anything from the time it was originally written. When I think about it, I go, oh, the emergence of Babylon, Babalon, as a thelemic goddess is rooted partially in the discovery of this text and the way that it has been interpreted since its rediscovery. I don't actually know, nor is it relevant to most of my practice, what the original meaning of the text was. I don't know that anyone knows what it was. What matters is we found it in the desert. We thought it was really cool. Everyone started seeing this like giant lady with a wine cup about it. And now we do a
And
ritual every
that
year.
is the postmodern move. And I think that is a place where like it does, this is the death of the author, right? Like it doesn't matter. We can't recover that stuff and that it's alive to us. It's interesting too with Thunder, right? Is like there's a trifecta here, especially in the Thelemic world. You have Thunder, you have the last Aether of Vision and the Voice, and you have the Daughter of Fortitude speech at the very end of the Enochian stuff, and those form like a hell of a trinity. But yeah, like, but again, that's a practitioner question. It's not, for me, I'm like, I do want to be asking like, was this performed? Because there is evidence that Thunder was performed. It was a performative thing. It was meant to be read out loud or something. That is interesting to me. But yeah, I think that I don't know that it solves the survivorship bias problem, but what it does say is that the survivorship bias is not a shackle. It's not a straitjacket, and it shouldn't be a straitjacket. And it certainly shouldn't be a straitjacket to practitioners. But I think for scholars, it's just important for us to name it and say, like Nagamati 6 is where Thunder is found, right? It's in Codex 6. Codex 6 is weird. That's a weird codex. There's all kinds of things in there that don't make a lot of sense. Why is that random section of Plato Republic in there? Why are there two Hermetic documents in Codex 6? Why is Thunder in there? What's happening with that? Why is that codex? Why is this codex unlike the others? Um, and so that's an interesting scholarly question that it's not just that Thunder is weird, but Thunder is found in a weird codex too, in Nagamani 6. So yeah. And this is also a place where I would never pretend as a scholar to gatekeep the life of this material. In fact, I would do the opposite. I'm saying, no, this is precisely the reason why we need to get this into the hands of people, because it's an amazing, beautiful text, and I want people like tap dancing on the roof, but to Thunder. In fact, and when I've taught Coptic, I've taught it with Thunder because, as you can imagine, most Coptic, Coptic like Hebrew is a very gendered, grammatically gendered language, and it's hard to learn the feminine gender in many languages, ancient languages, because all the characters are dudes in most stories. And so you just never hear women talking. And so you never hear feminine gender language. And so when I teach Hebrew, I teach Ruth because it's a bunch of women talking, and you actually have to hear women talking and hear feminine gender stuff. And Thunder goes back and forth. The I of Thunder, their gender switches. And so you hear them speaking in both genders. And in Coptic, it's really clear that's happening. And so for learning Coptic, it's really important because you hear both genders. But also when you read it in Coptic, you realize that the gender is switching mid-sentence sometimes. And that's a really groovy, again, the point of the Zohar, like, oh, we're gonna queer thunder. I'm like, uh-huh. Like you're late to the party. Um, you know, this is why if you want to teach yourself Coptic, teach yourself Coptic by reading Thunder.
I was thinking a point related to what you're saying about survivorship bias seems to be that modern society at large, I mean, a lot of people sort of point this to Christianity or post-Christian society or such, is that much of modern society at large is looking for monoliths and looking for uniformity. And I think a lot of what you were sort of saying about these findings, Nag Hammadi and the Dead Sea Scrolls or the different rune poems and such, point out how diverse and varied all these things were across different places and times and eras and things. And so the way that the runes were understood in different parts of the Nordic world would be entirely different from one place to another. It was potentially shown in the rune poems contradicting or not aligning and such. And sort of seeing this in the Nag Hammadi codices and the Dead Sea Scrolls and such. I don't know how familiar you are with the work of Earl Fontenelle, The Secret History of Western Esotericism podcast.
Yeah, Earl's fantastic guy.
Yeah, because he's often pointed to the Nag Hammadi codices and the Dead Sea Scrolls and such as suggesting possibly early Christianities and sort of how there was no one Gnosticism. Like Gnosticism is a modern idea anachronistically applied to a whole variety of different schools and modes of thought and things.
Right. It's Michael Williams' point. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah. I mean, I think probably there was even less homogeneity back then than now. But we have massive vectors of homogenizing, whether it's social media and television. I mean, entire dialects are dying out because of, there's one way of talking, and it's the way the TV talks or whatever. But yeah, I think that there was a lot of variety, a huge amount of variety. People were far less. Regionality was a much more common thing. And again, also, like, I'll give an example of this. Nag Hammadi is a great example. We have 3 manuscripts of the Apocryphon of John, 2 in Nag Hammadi, 1 in Berlin Codex, I think. All 3 are different translations. That means it was translated 3 different times from Greek into Coptic. So that shows us that there was indigenous interest in the text, and that those translators were not aware, or perhaps not aware, of the fact that the translation's already been done. So that shows you like a pretty radical regionality. And you can only imagine, the gulf between Iceland and Tromsø and, northern Norway and Gotland or whatever in Denmark. Yeah, like I'm sure that there was enough kinship among Norse heathens that could all go to Uppsala and kind of get down what was going on. But I even imagine that the priests operating at Uppsala, they didn't know what was going on in the wider Norse world. It wasn't like they were getting like, Erik Friedrichsson at Uppsala.net email. Like, we're doing a blot and down in the, outside of Eric's daughter's house. Like, they didn't know. I'm sure there was enormous regional variation. But again, I think that it's also one of these things where, because there was such enormous regional variation, I'll give you one more example. We have a Yahweh shrine down at the end of Elephantine Island in Egypt, and we know that shrine, the Yahweh shrine, was a polytheistic Yahweh shrine. That they worship several gods there, and including Yahweh and Anat were worshipped together there. Well, the shrine got torn down or destroyed by a riot because of the Egyptians destroyed it, and the people there wrote to Jerusalem and said, "Hey, can we rebuild the shrine and do sacrifices?" And they said, "Sure, rebuild it, but just don't do animal sacrifices. You can do libations and incense and stuff." They never told them stop worshiping Anat. I think that this is a weird thing. Like, we think that there was this weird, like, a Norse pagan or a Judean, we're all doing the same thing from Iceland to Nova Scotia of course they anymore. That's impossible. But also there had to be a big tent. Jerusalem knew that like you don't lean in hard on this. Like flex and show like you're important, but don't like shut it down. And again, I think that there was a much bigger tent to these things. And I think that there was a respect for regional variety that um, that when you went to the Demeter Shrine here, you did what they did there. And when you went to the Demeter Shrine there, you did what they did there. And you didn't cancel them. I don't know. Like yeah, I think that
It reminds me of the different temples of Dionysus that specifically had different cleanliness standards that were expected to be adhered to when you visited.
Yep. Yeah, that just yeah, I think that was the rule for the ancient world. And I think there's something to be learned about that, from that. I think there's a real thing to be learned about the fact that identity can be maintained and strengthened through difference. That we all don't need to like click our heels and agree on blah 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 blah. It's never been like that. I don't think it's healthy. I think what you end up getting is like the most milk toast version that everyone can agree on. It's not like spiritual death to me. And I want to like be able to be the one guy who's like, you guys are worshiping Yahweh wrong. Like you're worshiping Yahweh wrong. And like, all right, fine. Let's go up there and worship Yahweh.
So, being mindful of the time, and I know we started late because of power issues and stuff. Before we move into wrapping up, you'd hinted at having a strange relationship with Kabbalah yourself. I was wondering if you could maybe sort of elaborate on that a little.
Sure. Get myself Kabbalah canceled. Um, I I don't like the Kabbalah. Like it's what we do. It's my thing. Like I was born with it. It's like, okay, fine. Like I got to deal with it. Um, I'm much more comfortable like Maimonides, like it's all metaphors and stuff. I don't know. So, what I'll say is I don't like Luria. I really dislike Lurianic Kabbalah. So all of the stuff that I think most people know of when they think of Kabbalah, like Tzimtzum and all the Lurianic ideas of the breaking of the vessels and the klipot and all that stuff. I don't like any of that stuff. I'm a very strong proponent of Cordovero. Cordovero is like my guy. I think Cordovero and Kabbalah is just the most beautiful, most systematized, most coherent. It makes the most sense. It's just, I mean, literally, if you ever go to a Friday night service at a synagogue, you will go to a service invented by Cordovero and his colleagues. Kabbalat Shabbat was invented by uh, Cordovero and Alcabetz and those guys. Cordovero married Alcabetz's daughter. Like they're all like they're literally marrying each other. And yeah, I find Cordovero's system to me to be the end all be all of what I find personally interesting and coherent about Kabbalah. And I find Luria's system, while now the dominant system, everyone buys into some version of Luria's system. It's now the dominant system. I think it went totally off the rails. I think it led to Shabbatai Tzvi and Frank and all that stuff. And so I have a deep suspicion of the Lurianic system. So I'm a bit of the right word is um I'm like a hipster like when it comes to Kabbalah. I'm like uh I was like, yeah, Kabbalah was cool before it was popular. Like I'm like I don't know, like I listened to the first Neutral Milk Hotel record, not something like I don't know what the right example is. But like I'm like I'm very much like it should have ended here and this is the best thing. But I think I'm in the extreme minority when it comes to that position. Um because everyone thinks that Luria's system was basically synthesized with Cordovero. I don't think it was. Anyway, this is all really in the weeds and doesn't really matter. But I'm just kind of a bastard about it because when people say you don't like the Arizal, I'm like, nah. Like, so you don't like Kabbalah? I'm like, no, I like real Kabbalah. And like, it's like it's like I'm like throwing shade on um, Isaac Luria, but I don't get Kabbalah canceled now. Um, but yeah, I'm just like I just don't like Isaac Luria. And you can't say that. Like people get upset about Jewish people, Jewish Kabbalists get really upset about that. But I'm like, yeah, I'm a Cordoverist, through and through.
I mean, if it helps any, I know people who study Stoicism who say it was cool before it got to Rome.
Hey, yeah, I kind of agree with that.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, it was dope before. I'm like,
Before Seneca and Marcus Aurelius happened. Yeah.
oh, I'm even hardcore than that. I'm like Posidonius ruined Stoicism. Which is again the occultist people out there would really cancel me because Posidonius really is important for
Yeah.
for the rise of occultism. Yeah, I'm like Chrysippus or bust, man. Like
Yeah.
propositional logic. He invented that shit, dude.
It's like you see people looking into late Platonism and they're like Iamblichus or nothing. Like Porphyry
Hey.
can
Yeah, oh yeah. Oh, that's a legit beef though. I
Yeah.
mean, they really are different. They really are different.
Yeah,
And people
yeah.
are like, it's theurgy. It's whether you
Mhm.
like, I mean, shit, like if you're really a Neoplatonist and you're on the Porphyry train, you're gonna have to be like a vegetarian and stuff.
Yeah.
Which is the exact opposite of, Iamblichus is like, let's kill animals to get close to God. And I'm like, all right. So that's the difference.
And I upset
You
everyone
can't
by being a vegan who's a fan of Iamblichus.
Yeah. If you can piss everyone off,
Right?
then you've won.
Why not?
It's like I'm gonna sacrifice my I'm gonna do a sacrifice of the Beyond Burger.
Yeah. I'm gonna go hunt
So
me a wild lettuce for God.
far be it for me to judge. Yeah, I'm again, I love part of what's great about my job is I get to be knee deep in conversations where I like literally don't have to have an opinion. And sometimes it's uncomfortable because various communities will come to me being like, adjudicate this issue for us. Like, I ain't the rabbi of y'all. I'm not even the rabbi of this. My wife's the rabbi for precisely that reason, because I don't want to be the rabbi of anything.
I was gonna say, that's why you married a rabbi.
Yeah, exactly. I'm
You
like,
don't have to decide.
no, I literally ask there'll be issues where like we'll get something from out of the house. I'm like, like, hey Dodie, I call her Dodie. I'm like, Dodie, can we put this on this plate? And she's like, why are you asking me? Like, the hell why I'm asking you? It's your job. You got to decide. Like, can we have this? And she's like, yes. I'm like, all right, authoritative. Yeah, I don't get involved in any thing. In fact, my wife has forbidden me from becoming a rabbi. She's like, you can't do that. And it's funny because I only want to do that because I want to wade into technical legal Jewish law because I just like it's just Dungeons and Dragons. I just want to play Dungeons and I just want to DM my religion is basically what it comes down to. And so she's like, no, I'm the DM. Okay, you're the DM.
I feel like my last question before we do start to wrap up then is if that's the case, who decided on the interior decor of the room you're in currently?
Oh, you're assuming there's interior decor involved. This is called putting random stuff on shelves. No,
I also think I see your incantation
You're right
bowl
there.
on the edge of your
Yep.
desk
I have a
there.
couple actually. I actually have like 4
Mhm.
incantation bowls that I've managed to acquire over the years.
Nice.
Yeah, they some of them are not in great shape.
Nice.
I can grab I have a Mendium one I didn't show on camera for the episode that I have. Yeah, they come to all, I mentioned this in the episode during COVID. If you've ever been to Europe, you know that like every little village in Europe has a museum because every little village in Europe used to be part of the Roman Empire, and therefore they have just here's all the random stuff we have when we built our town.
I
And
can
it's just
confirm that we do.
yeah, like every little village has like and they have crazy important, like sometimes like really, really shockingly impressive stuff. And what ended up happening in COVID is a lot of these small museums really they were crushed. They couldn't open for a year, 2 years. And a lot of these incantation bowls, if they're not really, really high quality, they're not going to display them. And so they have one because Lord Carnarvon used to live at Downton Abbey and he died and he left them 3 incantation bowls. And so one of them is good and the rest of them aren't really great. And they put the rest in storage. Well, to basically stave off extinction, they sold huge holdings, which is sad. And you got to do what you got to do. and I follow the auction circuit because I'm a rare book dealer, and incantation bowls will come up, and often it would just say Sasanian bowl on the auction. I'm like, you're really underselling this, guys. And 3 people would bid on them, and somehow like I would get them for, you would be shocked, €60.
Holy shit.
You would be blown away. I got some of these. I got it. I'll show you one real fast, actually. I got it. It's been repaired.
That
But this is the one
that
that
hurts my
has the
soul.
clearest writing in it. This is a one.
Oh,
This is a
wow.
Mandaean one. It's not published yet. I'm gonna work with someone to get it published. But also it has instructions on the back as well. These are all dated
old is
between the
that?
5th and 8th century Common Era. You can see it's also done in quarters here. Very clear writing. This is clearly Mandaic. I can read some of these words. So I'm going to get this published because it needs to be part of the archive of humanity and needs to be published. This bowl went for like €300.
Wow.
Yeah, it's extremely old, and
1,200
it's the kind of
years
thing that,
old.
again, like there's all questions about like, should I have it? Should it be in a museum? Should it be whatever? Like, I don't know what the answer to that is. There's ethical questions there, and I'm going to sort those out at some point. But what the main thing is, I want to get it published so that it will at least be a part of it will be out
Mhm.
there, and whether I'll keep it and donate it or when I die, it'll go to whatever.
One day
Yeah, then
you
my
will be
children
Lord Crumpet, who has left
end up
his
in the
holding
DIA or
small
whatever.
museum.
But yeah, you'd be surprised that the antiquities that come to the market that are ethically accessible. I won't even talk about the ones that are not ethically accessible, of which there are plenty, unfortunately. Um, but yeah, the incantation bowls, yeah, they're neat. I have 4 or 5 of them, something like that.
So,
Absolutely wild.
Uh,
Sorry, go ahead,
no,
Snow.
I was going to say, so I really want to thank you for spending this time with us and sitting down and talking to us. And I really appreciate the work that you do on Esoterica and the sort of knowledge and the views that you've shared here with us. For people wanting to find you and find more of your stuff, where can they go promote your things here?
it's just YouTube. I have Esoterica on YouTube. I don't have any other social media because it scares me. Um,
Fair.
yeah, social media terrifies me. It's like the social media use is the single greatest predictor for like self-harm and mental illness, and it's just like it just worries the hell out of me. And I have 2 small girls, one of whom's on the autism spectrum, and I'm terrified for them. Yeah, so I don't have any social media. So yeah, you can find me on YouTube. You can find me at my website, just justinsledge.com. I have a rare book business where if folks want to buy. In fact, I have incantation bowl fragments if folks want to take a look at some of those. Um, and but yeah, that's it. I mean, the book business has an Instagram, but it's not my Instagram, so you won't see me posing in front of things frequently. You'd be surprised to know that I'm camera shy. It's funny, I can get in front of a room of hundreds of people and lecture without feeling like there's anyone there, but you put me in this room with that camera, and I'm like, but yeah, that's it. Esoterica is kind of my main and only outlet, and I really hope it's a useful resource for people for a wide range of reasons. And insofar as it is, I'm just feel incredibly blessed and incredibly honored. Especially when I hear people, religious people, spiritual people, for whom esoterica is a resource, that is just extremely humbling for me. And um, you know, Sartre said that freedom is choosing what we will be responsible for. And I love the idea that freedom is just simply choosing what we're going to be responsible for. It's not you can do what you want. It's you're choosing responsibility. And insofar as this has now become my vocation and I'm now responsible for doing this material, I really hope I always do right by the spiritual and religious communities that look to esoterica as a resource. And insofar as I do well, I'm really happy. And insofar as I miss that mark, I'm also hope that I'm humble enough to do the right thing.
All right, beautiful people. We've come to this point in the show. Let's plug our pluggables. You can find us at patreon.com/aroundgrandfatherfire. You can also find us at aroundgrandfatherfire.com. And you can find my WordPress at saranth.wordpress.com. And my Patreon is patreon.com/SaranthOdenson, where you can patronize me for topic suggestions and prayers. So, Snow, how about yours?
Sorry, I'm just laughing at the fact you said we can just go patronize you. It's not we're giving you our patronage. We just go patronize. No, our little Saranth with his little writings. Give him so much. Give him the money. No. You can find me at snowthegoth.com or linktree/snowthegoth, and I am doing stuff there, and all of my things are from there. What about you, Cabra?
I'm still Steel City Witch on YouTube, and I am at steelcitywitch.com, where I have a blog that I haven't updated in a while. So I've been writing too many rituals. How about you, Emily?
I'm still streaking fate at streakingfate.wordpress.com,
I want to again
where I
thank you,
occasionally update my blog.
Justin. Thank you so much for joining us. I would love to have you back on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to thank all of our supporters. For those who cannot support the show through the Patreon, our Discord is open and free. You do not have to be a Patreon member to join. Please promote this wherever you can on Spotify and any other Apple and any other places where you get your podcasts. And I want to thank again all of our listeners, our guests, and all the co-hosts. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time around the fire.